the first BE seminar this semester. For those who don't know me, I'm Dr. Stephen Koenig. I'm a professor in bioengineering and CT surgery. I see some of the former students who are in medical device design class. I believe you're in for a real treat today. We are really blessed and fortunate to have our good friend and colleague, Dr. Spence, do the first seminar this semester. To kind of give you a little bit of background, Dr. Spence and I knew him when I first interviewed here at the University of Louisville in 1996. They were doing a lot of research in minimally invasive coronary artery bypass graft surgery, trying to find ways to do it off pump and through small incisions. That's how we kind of first met. We've had all sorts of fun working on a number of different projects. Professor Guru and I worked with him on what became the Abiomed Symphony device, which was our attempt at developing a circulatory support device that enabled a less invasive approach using kind of a pacemaker type pocket approach. Dr. Spence is a cardiothoracic surgeon by training, practiced clinically for a number of years. And then one day, the entrepreneurial bug had bit him so hard that he just said, you know, I'm tired of taking call early in the morning. He had a number of different ongoing projects and actually left the practice of cardiothoracic surgery to pursue his dream and passion of developing medical devices. I don't know the exact amounts of patents that he's had and invention disclosures, but suffice it to say he's got hundreds of issued patents and many more that are going through the patent process. A number of his patents have been successfully translated into clinical practice. So he has a large number of different medical devices that are in clinical use today that have been acquired by major companies, some of which he's going to share, such as Edwards Life Sciences, Medtronic, Abiomed. I think you're really going to enjoy this presentation because what he's going to share with you are basically his lessons learned over the years working as a cardiothoracic surgeon, as a businessman and entrepreneur, being in venture capital, and working with biomedical engineers. So it is my great privilege and honor to introduce to you Dr. Paul Spence. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Stephen. I guess we'll start off, and thank you for the introduction. So I think we know what our mission is today. Let's see if we can get the next slide to move ahead. Where's our first? Oh, here we go. So today we're going to talk about the process of innovation, and I think Stephen and I have walked through a lot of these processes together. He's probably been involved in at least a third or half of the different projects that I've worked on. So you've got an internal resource here that's quite incredible, and also we'll show you some of the things that Guru had been working with us together. But there is no question there's a huge need for device innovation. The market is just getting bigger and bigger. The whole world wants health and better health. And there are a lot of unsolved problems. Chronic diseases are huge, as you know, diabetes, COPD, all these major healthcare problems. And there's a big issue with long-term disease management and how to reduce cost of care. The big companies are rolling in money. They are very good at selling what they do. They're giant marketing companies, and they're very good at dealing with the FDA and CE mark and these kinds of things. But they're not very good at solutions. They are so busy at getting everything into the box and out for sale and making sure it meets the specs, and they don't have an audit from the FDA, that they really don't have any engineers left or any brain power left to think of something new. And R&D departments have actually been cut in most of these, and most of the engineers are actually shifted into just process engineering and making sure that the quality is adequate. Something else has happened, and there's been huge competition from technology companies. And a technology company can type in a bit of code and post it on the web, and all of a sudden it's $1 billion company. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way with medical products. If you're working on a drug, you've got to get it through test tubes and petri dishes and rats, and if you're working with devices, you have to go through benchtop testing and then run it through cows or pigs or whatever it is that you need to work it on, and then get it into humans. So the money's just not there anymore. So interestingly, there is an opportunity to get things done where you don't need venture capital. And in fact, speaking to one of the Wilson Sonsini lawyers a couple of weeks ago, he said in his area between Menlo Park down to San Diego, there are really only a couple of VC firms seriously looking at medical devices right now. So how do you go about solving one of these problems? Well, the first thing is you have to identify a big market. If you find a small market, you're not going to find these big companies looking for your product. This came forth to me when I was speaking to a friend who's a cardiac surgeon who moved over to Medtronic, and he said, we sell $15 billion a year, and he said, I can't take on a company, or I can't take on a project that makes $100 million. Now you think $100 million is a lot of money. He says, I'm supposed to boost this by 20% a year. I got to grow $3 billion a year. How many companies do I have to buy at $100 million? I said, that's just too many. I can't manage that. They're looking for very big things. The companies are bigger, they're merging into larger entities, so you got to think of something really big, or else this is kind of like a peanut in a dinosaur. He's not going to see it. So once you've identified the problem, you really have to identify a potential solution. And it's not enough to identify it and draw pictures, because the pictures are worth nothing. It's almost impossible to get someone to bite at a patent or a drawing. You got to make it work somehow. And so you have to, from the point of view of a company or any investor, you have to de-risk the problem. You have to build something, you have to show them something, you have to show some element of progress on this to make them believe that this can actually turn into a real product. You also have to get a patent application in, and you have to show that it's not already out there. And it's scary. The world is very smart. And if you've been thinking about it here, there's probably someone thinking about it in Belgium and another one in Australia, and everybody's thinking about the same problems, and it's amazing how often that everyone's thinking of the same solution. Everyone's seeing the same problem, everyone's seeing the same solution. So you've got to be very careful that you haven't got competition out there that's already showing the same kind of pathway that you're proposing. And then finally, then you have to create a plan of how you're going to test this and how you're going to study it and make it happen. So we're going to look at quickly at four different projects that have been worked on over the last years. The first one was a superficial ventricular assist device. The second one is a superficial counterpulsation device. Then we look at a mitral valve replacement device, and our newest company is the UofL-BE Sports, which is a sports therapy product. And we'll look at the sequence of development that we did with each of these to try and learn something, so that maybe you don't have to go through and bang your head quite as much as we did. Here's the first exciting one that we worked on, and it shows, I guess I used the mouse here. This is a tiny little pump, and it was miniaturized by Hardware, which was bought by Medtronic. What it's doing is sucking the blood from the left atrium, here's the heart, and then instead of reinfusing it back in the aorta, which is a typical thing, it comes up and it infuses in your subclavian artery. So this is actually sitting right here in a pacemaker pocket. So instead of opening your chest, the idea of this project was that we could convert heart failure support from a great big sternotomy operation to a small procedure. So that's one we worked on for a long time. We had then created a second variation on this, which was called the Symphony device from Abiomed. And what this is a counterpulsation pump. It just sucked the blood out and then pushed it back in. So the blood was sucked out in systole when the heart beat. So the same idea, if you're opening a door, as someone's pushing on it, they feel like they're not doing any work to open that door. The same idea, as the heart is beating, this is sucking the blood into the pump. When the heart relaxes, it puts it back in. And here's a little video just to look at what that pump looks like. So you see a moving membrane, and one side is an air tube coming in, and blood is on the other side, and it pumps the blood in and out of this Gore-Tex tube in here. And you can see from the side view the membrane's moving up and down, pumping the blood in and out. And I must give a great compliment to a guru on this project, because we didn't know how it was going to work. And he took this to a simulation and produced a whole bunch of numbers. We had no idea if it was going to be right. We put it in cows, and it was exactly what we found. So it was a very nice study in terms of teaching us that simulation on a computer can sometimes be extremely accurate. The next problem we had with this project here was, this is called PIV, particle imaging velocitometry, and we had to make sure that this washed, that there weren't any stagnant areas. So we chased all the way over to Berlin and found a crazy Russian guy who was able to help us figure out our washing on this. And next major project we took on several years ago, and I don't know, is Landon Tompkins here? Anyone see him? So this is a project Landon worked with us on. And our idea was there were a whole bunch of aortic valves available on the market, and no one had figured out how to put in a mitral valve. So what we said, what we were going to do is put an anchor on top of the mitral valve and dock any one of these valves into it. So in other words, this would become a platform dock that we could use for any valve put on in the mitral position. So the idea started with a little cannula put in from the apex of the ventricle, and then a curved delivery catheter, and then we pushed this helix around the valve so that you had several turns above and several turns below the valve. And when it was left, what you're left with, this helix with several turns above and several turns below. And next step, all you had to do was deliver a valve and lock it inside that helix. And it auto-locked because if you could think, if you stretch a helix, these are inflatable valves, the helix stretches up and it's very, very secure. And over on our office on 3rd Street, that's what it looked like. It didn't look very fancy. That's a pig heart. That's a beaker wrapped up with some tape, and that's what Landon had to work with. And he made, with the other engineers, actually hundreds of different shapes of those helix. A little curve differences on the way in, a little bit of diameter differences, variations of different turns. And eventually, we got that working. And here it is. It's turned into the Edwards Sapien M3, and as you can see, it's really not much different than what we showed you before. They've coated our nitinol helixes with some Gore-Tex, and they're coming across the septum. The helix has been put in place on top of the mitral valve. And here's the product. Step 1 is put in the dock. Step 2, here's their valve. And then all they ended up doing is this valve, of course, is delivered in a tiny 12-French catheter pushed out from the groin. So this goes with a groin puncture, you put in the dock. Same groin puncture, you put in the valve, which is their aortic valve, just with a little wrap on the outside or a little furry coat on it. And that's the valve inflated inside. Interesting, there's been billions spent on this project of trying to do a mitral valve on a catheter. They are now up between 20 and 30 patients with this project, all survived. No one has done more than 2 or 3 in a row with a survival. So here you have something starting with, as you saw, a little pig heart in a glass beaker. They wouldn't believe it would work, but now they're our best friends. So all these projects we've shown here are what we've done with medical devices where we've identified huge markets, and what we've done is then passed them off to a big company that had lots of money, like Medtronic or Edwards, to do it. And I guess we got kind of sick doing things and then passing them off. So we decided we were going to do something which we could do ourselves. And we needed something that didn't require an FDA barrier. Because if you take, for example, this last product here, I'm sure Edwards is going to have to spend several $100 million just to get through CE mark and FDA approval. Forget about all the engineering and development and dead ends that they spent. So we wanted to find something that didn't have an FDA. We kind of thought of this in the same way you would think of over-the-counter vitamins. They don't really need an approval. They're not some giant important blood pressure drug or heart drug or chemotherapy. But there's just an over-the-counter market. But we didn't see an over-the-counter market for medical devices. We really didn't see it. We said we were going to try and make this ourselves. So we set up this sports company, and I'm going to see if I can make this work. Is it working? Well, hang on. We're going to have to go right back to the beginning here. Okay, so I'd like to get that back to the beginning if I could. So watch, oh yeah, here we're okay. this is actually, if anybody's been involved with any athletics. Thank you. Let's get me back here. There we go, thank you. Didn't quite escape. Anyone involved with any athletics therapy or any athletes, they get into an ice tank. Have you everyone ever seen that? They stand up in ice at 10 degrees Celsius water or 55 Fahrenheit, and they stand there for 15 minutes. And the reason they do that is that really cuts down on the inflammation and soreness in their legs. And what we thought, well, that was pretty stupid and pretty primitive because we don't share each other's bathtubs. And what do you do when you travel? And we thought also it was pretty stupid. We went over and visited the Real Madrid soccer team, and they have €100 million salaries per year to pay all those guys. Half the games are on the road, and they're getting injured all the time. They have zero recovery after an away game. Stupid. To me, it was like having a Formula One car and saying we don't have any money to change the oil, and the engines are blowing up all over the place, and they're wondering why. So we decided we'd kind of get into this idea of doing cooling and recovery. So instead of getting into ice water, what we do is you have a pair of pants that gave compression, and then a cooling console that circulated the water through it. And on the inside, this is what it looks like. The outside has a very tight compression fabric. It took us forever to find it. We chased around all over and then found in northern Italy a really nice area where they know how to sew and do a lot of design for a lot of the big companies. So there's an Italian compression fabric. And then inside that is a plastic sheet which has got channels through it. And the water flows through these channels and reduces your leg temperature to about 10 degrees, which is very bang on what we are. We had to make it portable, so we put it in a backpack. There's the control unit pulled out of the backpack. We then decided, how are we going to test this in a grueling situation? Somebody says the worst sport, Tour de France. Right out of the blue, Movistar team phoned us. We heard about this. We had no idea how it happened. This is a team that won the Tour de France this year, and they won it. They didn't win last year, but they won the last 2 years before. We've been with them 4 years, and they won 3 out of 4 years. And here's one of the riders, and he's wearing the pants. This is a thermal imaging camera, and you can see his pants are, of course, blue, 10 degrees, and sorry, 9.6. And of course, this is what his upper body looks like. But these guys put it on at the end of their racing day. They get in the butts, they stink, they feel terrible. They get in a shower, and then they get into their chairs. At the insistence of Professor Koenig, he said, we need some science. He said, we weren't sure we want any more science with that. So after a long hunt, we found that there was a very famous professor up at Ohio State University named Dr. Kramer. So we went up to him and said, listen, how do we do this? We don't have a lab for this. We don't know what we're doing. So he designed an exercise protocol. And if you look at here, creatine kinase is measured in your blood, and it should be at a very low level. And creatine kinase is a protein that comes largely from muscle. And if you exercise, your muscle starts to break down and the level starts going up. So he did an exercise protocol, and one group got the Aquila treatment, one didn't. And if you waited 24 hours, here's the level of CK rise, which was up about 1,000. And it was very close to it was about between 500 and 600 in this group here that had the treatment with the cooling and compression. So we had a 40% reduction in the muscle injury if you ice down with this system an hour after training. And this corresponded very nicely that they were 24 and 48 hours much less sore. You can see the soreness was less. Quite a remarkable thing, which we also noticed, we gave this to the UofL women's basketball team. Your jump force is much higher. And this, they found with their athletes, this is identical to what they found on the women's basketball team. If you measure their ability to jump at 24 and 48 hours, it's way, way better if you use this as jump. And then finally, a lot of athletes complain they can't sleep, especially like the Tour de France. They're just aching so bad. And actually, do you people remember Larry O'Bannon from a long time ago, UofL basketball? So he was in our office last week. He's now turned 31. He was really good, but he was one of those guys that just wasn't quite the NBA. So he's been playing in Israel and Italy, and now he's in Argentina. But he was in the office, and he has terrible trouble as he's gotten older that he can't sleep. his legs ached so bad. The movie star team sort of gotten us onto this. They do a second treatment just before bedtime, just before sleep. And their legs are so much more comfortable. They're not rolling over back and forth, waking up at 2 and 3 in the morning, trying to pace around and feel better. Then we did another study, which I really questioned the ethics of, but we didn't know what happened. This was done at the University of Vienna at their Olympic Training Center. And they took Olympic athletes and they did this amazing protocol where they put them on a treadmill and ran them to exhaustion. So they set it at 10K and just keep ramping up the height of the angle of the treadmill, which anyone who's tried that is pretty nasty. And then when they couldn't go any farther, they just jumped off. They fell down. So what they did is, they did that, believe it or not, 4 times in a row, with an hour break in between. Now, anyway, this was all approved by the Austrian Olympic Committee. But as you can see, the no cryo group and the cryo group, the no cryo is red, the blue. As you notice, they all go down. They can't go quite as far on the 4th run. No surprise. They start being able to run almost 18 minutes. The no cryo group could run 16 minutes on the 4th run. The cryo group was able to go almost a minute more. Kind of a remarkable difference between the two things. So it seems to cut down their exhaustion. Here's some more pictures of how the Movistar guys use it. They're on a bus. They've taken a shower in the back of the bus. Then they all have their own lounge chairs, and then they sit down and cool down with this and get a little sustenance. Miami Dolphins here are using it. Here's the X Game champions from one of those bizarre, I don't know what you want to call X Games, but here's a daredevil from X Games who's also using it, who won last year. So here's kind of like, I guess, our sort of a summary, or here's kind of what we kind of tried to condense out of all these banging our head against the wall. And Stephen asked me to sort of lay out some of the thoughts. First one is, how do we fund them? The first one was Circulate, which was that pump, that little tiny pump in the pacemaker pot. We went to venture capital and they funded that. The next one, Symphony, we did it with a joint venture partner. The third one, that mitral valve, we did with Edwards, the corporate partner. And then finally we got fed up and we said we want to do it ourselves. So the last one, we've done it on our own. They've all had pluses and minuses. They all cause a lot of trouble, but overall I'm very pleased with our decisions on each one. And I think each project you do, you have to think, you can't just have a cookie cutter, I'm going to VC, I'm going to do this. You have to think just as hard about how you're going to fund it as you are going to spend on the project. As we said before, you've got to find a big problem. You want a large market. But I think I learned something as a kid. We used to go hunting for golf balls, and one thing we learned was if you walk from the fairway looking for golf balls, you never found them. Why? Because everyone was on the fairway walking there. If you walk from the other side and look back, you found lots of golf balls. So don't look at it from the same way as everybody else. Everyone's looking at the problem, and everyone wants to sit in their chair and look at it this way. You need to look at it from behind, from sideways, or from another direction. Because if you're going down the straight road, you can be sure there's a lot of people on that road. For that mitral project, there were a zillion companies with these big arms and grabbers and all kinds of stuff that ended up making a device you're supposed to put in a catheter as big as your thumb. Most of them stuck against a brick wall. We said we had to think something totally different. So the next message is trends are powerful. Miniaturization in medical devices is absolutely the trend. Open surgery is slowly dying. So don't come up with a procedure that's going against the trend. The patients don't want it, and the doctors don't want it. You've got to find a technical barrier. If it's too easy, they'll just do it themselves. For a market, you're always better to find something that's already made the big market rather than you have to make the market. So for example, the Aquila one, everybody used an ice bath. I never heard one person like the ice bath. We could replace it and make it much more comfortable. For mitral valve replacement, if you offer the patient the choice between having an open surgery for mitral valve replacement or a transcatheter mitral valve replacement, that's a no-brainer. The market's already there, and it's not too hard to convince a patient that you can have a choice between a catheter going up your leg and go home tomorrow, or have a big incision and be recovering for the next few months. Pretty easy. Find the market that's already there. It's very hard to make the market and make the product. You run out of time. And then you need to find, to do this, of course, you have to get a development strategy that works and matches with it. So what are the key essentials? I worked several years with a venture capital firm, and I was very fortunate to meet a Harvard professor who was also a physics grad from Chicago. And his comment was, make sure the project doesn't involve antimatter or anti-gravity. In other words, if you have some step in there that doesn't make sense, that's not going to work, don't do the project. A lot of times they would jump from this slide to this slide, and I would see him go, well, how did you get there? Well, we haven't quite figured that step out yet, but we're about to do it. If you've got that step in there that you really can't even envision how you're going to do it, it's not going to work. Okay. Then there's the next category, which I've described as the near unsolvable. That's just slightly less than antimatter and anti-gravity, but you see that you're involved in creating some mysterious material that's supposed to do whatever. It's probably not going to happen. You're going to have your hands full with making existing technologies work. The important message we learn in every project is time estimates are completely wrong. They're absolutely garbage. The VCs are all out there making Gantt charts and spreadsheets and all kinds of projections. It's just ludicrous. It's insane. You really have to just do what it takes. If you're trying to find your way along, it's going to take what it's going to take. So corollary to that is you really better keep your burn rate down, because if you're burning all your money when you're on the wrong target, you're going to be broke before you even know what to do. And that happens a lot. And capital investors all look at their return on investment. So they need to have so much done within a year. So they project that out that you're going to be here at the end of the year. It's like we're sitting here with a tricycle and they have us projected to be on the moon at the end of the year. It's stupid. It's not going to happen. But they need to have that projection to get the return they want. Therefore, they work backwards and make garbage assumptions. To get to the finish, you're usually better to go to the finish line and look back to see where you need to go. And if you look back from the finish line, the pathway gets much more clear. What do I need for regulatory? How many patients would I need to run through the trial? How many products would I need? What would I have to do? If you look back, that makes it a lot more clear what you need going forward. Going forward, it seems like a big fan of things, but if you look back, you cut down on your choices and your mistakes. Along the way, you're going to need people to get interested in your projects. And projects don't move along with no increase. They have stepped increases. Nothing works, finally it works on the bench top. Aha, there's a chance. Does it work in a cow? Yes, works in a cow. All of a sudden, we've gone from here to here. People are starting to get interested because the heartbeat of a mammal is about 100,000 beats a day. If you could run that a month in any mammal, you're in a pretty good situation. You run through millions of heartbeats and prove that this has got a very good chance of working. You're left with a question is, what do you want to do? Do you want to start up a standalone company? Do you want to try and find a partner? In general, I found the best thing is to start up on your own because the big companies have no interest till you're farther down. And if you're lucky, you can create an exit at a lower cost for them. For example, the Mitro project, they all had valves for aorta. It wasn't very hard for them to think, I'm going to turn that upside down and put that in on a catheter. So that made it an attractive point. The other choice is you take your project directly to sales. And for software companies, that's wonderful because you don't have a regulatory path, and if it crashes, you just say reboot. But for most medical companies, that's not realistic. You can't just say reboot to a patient whose valve shut down. They're dead. How do you get going? Well, you got to start. You got to mock it up. You got to keep iterating. You got to evaluate and iterate and throw them out. I also found it very useful to get as many existing devices that are similar and modify them. Use off-the-shelf parts. Really cut down on this printing, and it sounds so exciting, and this is bad to say to engineering school, but everyone wants to print their new part in metal and plastic and everything else. You know what? Just find garbage that's thrown out of the hospital and bend it. It looks much more finished. It doesn't have those rough edges on it. The people who use it say, oh, this was what the valve that I normally use. Well, of course it is. We just bent it a little bit. Okay? You show them some rough 3D printed thing that looks like it's got lunar scape on it. It really doesn't look that attractive to them. We found that even just going to your Lowe's and your local hardware store, you can accomplish a lot. When we spoke to Edwards, they wondered how we did so many of those helix things at different dimensions. They put them in CAD, and then they sent them out to a company to get molds built. And in the course of 2 months, they could do 1 or 2 designs. Landon and his guys went to Lowe's, bought plumbing parts, reground them, and can make 4 or 5 iterations in 1 day. They had no idea. They came here thinking we had some amazing cabinet. No, just go to Lowe's and wrap it around. So don't spend too much money. Alibaba is amazing. They have all kinds of stuff on it. And remember, you're always wrong at the beginning, so don't spend your money early on. Working contacts, you got to make sure that you keep showing doctors and users. Make sure they're traveling on with you. You're not going down on a crazy road by yourself. Make sure you design for the location. I remember when I was operating one time, a guy brought us this device to stabilize the heart, and the heart was moving all over the place. He said, no, don't worry, I got it solved. We'll be back in a couple of months from California. He brought it in, and he put it in there, and he showed us how to hook it up. And I'll never forget the PA was looking at it, and I looked down and said, well, that's really quite remarkable. This looks like total stability. The PA turned around, looked down, and goes, it's totally stable, but how the hell are we supposed to get our hands in there to do any work? The thing was so big that it didn't leave any room to work. It stabilized the heart, but there was no way you could sew in there. You got to understand a lot of viewpoints, the buyer, the patients. You got to learn the existing markets. Who are the purchasers, the regulators, the payers? How do you fit in? You can't just have a product and hope someone's going to jump on it. You got to build a team. I learned this from a German guy we work with, and he said the first thing we got to learn is keep the idiots out. Idiots ruin it for everybody. They're always about themselves. They upset the next person. They're just trouble. Even if they're geniuses, get rid of them. They're just going to ruin it for the other guys you're going to work with. Just take practical people who put their hands on and want to get something done. It's going to be a long trip. Eventually this idiot is going to fall off the rails. Even if you can hold it together for a few months, it will happen to you. Get consultants and advisors if you really need them. Make sure you have a large variety of skill sets and don't just gather more people who know the same thing. You got to search worldwide for the best talent. We had to find fabrics and plastics in Germany and Italy, and we had to find pump parts in Germany, and we got bits and pieces of our sports product made in Austria and Germany. It's all over. Some it's from the U.S. You got to keep shopping to find what you need. The piece you don't work on is the one that may be killing you. As we reiterated, be cheap with your funding, keep moving. If you have a project, companies want to keep coming to see if they're interested. If you're stale, they forget you. If they come back and 3 or 6 months later, you got the same slides and the same prototypes, this is you. Forget it. They don't care anymore. Keep the ball moving. Never show the same presentation or prototypes twice. Private investors can help you get going. Dr. Koenig and Guru can tell you that the SBIR is a really remarkable way to fund projects. You can look at big companies if you're able to find it fits into something that they could invest in. And venture capital, but you've got to be realistic about what their projections are and what reality is. Probably the most important thing is be resilient, or just don't do it. Every project that doesn't die has multiple near-death experiences, okay? And I'll never forget this one that we did with that simple helix. We kept putting it in cows in France. There's a very good lab in Paris. Everyone thought we were having a very wonderful time traveling to Paris all the time, but no, we were in the sub-basement in the south of Paris with a dank, dark 3 floors down. And the cows kept dying, and we couldn't get around it. And we were over the limit of all funding. We had blown everything. And I traveled back 3 more trips to Paris, meeting with the vets, trying to figure out what we could do. The first time he said hopeless. The second time he said hopeless. Third time he said, you know, I think keep working on this one. So we went and worked on that one, and when we were broke and we had to go way over and dig into the piggy bank again. And we finally got the project back on track, and it's still going. But it would have been very easy to just quit after that last cut. With the Aquila one, we thought we had a big break with the Lakers. We did something really stupid. We sold Kobe Bryant. We had a German manufacturer making these pads who was making our blood pumps. They were exploding. He didn't have the right technology for sealing. They kind of let us go a bit, but then he said Jeremy Lin, I don't know if anyone remembers him when he was playing for the Lakers, wanted to try it. We said, we promise it won't leak. He put it on his bed, reported it felt wonderful, then all of a sudden the tank didn't have any more water in it, and we'd soak his whole bed all the way through. Okay. We got rid of that supplier, we found a new one. We then went to a company, have you ever heard of KTM Motorcycles? Austrian company, makes off-road bikes and stuff, really heavy duty. We said, we were making our controllers and they were breaking. We needed to find someone who made it sound really awful off the road. Someone said they have a consulting group. So we go over there, we said, we need to make this so these athletes can throw them off the bus, kick them, stomp them, and they don't break. Well, we're the company, they said. So they built them all up. We built 700 of them. We started shipping. They were all over the U.S. They were in South Africa, South America, all over Europe, and they started breaking. And apparently these idiots didn't put a resistor and a diode around the sensor, and the whole thing blew. Now, we've got egg on our face with some pretty big organizations and sports teams. We've got to recall all this stuff and pull it back in. That's what's going to happen. And if you really can't take that kind of stuff, if you're just going to put your head down and cry, then probably don't stop. Probably the most important message of the whole thing, the German guys refer to Goethe a lot, but this is a German philosopher, his dates are there. But he thought very highly, like most Germans do, of action. Action teaches you about the market, the solution. When you're moving, people want to get on your bus. Not many people want to get on a bus that's parked on the side of the road for a few weeks. Nobody gets on that bus. But it attracts more people who attract more people. And good things start to happen. So good luck with your project. And I'd like to, at this point, thank Dr. Koenig, who's helped us with so many, especially in his lab. We did all the testing for all the devices, which are the implantable ones we showed. For Guru, who did all the preliminary scientific evaluations, helping with designing studies. And even Stephen for kicking our behinds to go up to Ohio State to get some science for our Apollo project when we said we're sick of sciences. But these guys have been tremendous supporters for us, so thank you to those guys. And as much as he won't tell you, both of these guys, and especially Stephen, because he's just completely humble, has worked not just with me, but with tons of other companies. So there's a lot of information up there, and if you want to pick somebody's brain who's worked with tons of projects and doctors and different things, he's seen as much as anyone. All right, we'll leave you with a little Goethe, and I guess if there are any questions, we'll be glad to answer them.
So when it comes to different sources of funding, one of the things we hear a lot about nowadays is this crowdfunding thing.
Yeah.
Do you think there's ever a role for